it is such a pleasure to see you here. I hope you are always healthy and safe, no matter where you are. Come, take a seat and join me in listening to this story. Let's get started. Dawn had not yet broken, and the prairie was still wrapped in a cold mist. Thomas Yates opened the door of his cabin, planning to head out to the gate to meet the stagecoach he had waited for all winter. Today was supposed to be the day his bride arrived, the day laughter would return to this barren ranch. But the moment he stepped onto the porch, his blood ran cold right in front of the wooden gate. 3 bodies hung limp, hair matted across pale faces, their torn dresses swaying in the wind. Their shadows stretched long across the red dirt, looking like 3 silent figures waiting for sunrise. Thomas froze in place. His heart pounded like a hammer and his calloused hands clenched until they turned white. The sight was like a curse hanging over his front door. Then he heard a sound as thin as the wind, a raspy moan. One of the 3 gave a faint twitch, bare feet clawing hopelessly at the air. They were still alive. Thomas sprang into action, his hunting knife flashing from its sheath. He cut down the first rope, catching the limp body as it collapsed. Then the second, then the third. All 3 crumpled to the ground, their breathing shallow. Thomas knelt beside them, his eyes flashing with fury. He whispered something under his breath, words lost to the cold morning air. Thomas Yates dropped to his knees beside the 3 bodies he had just cut down, his heart thudding violently in his chest. He had never witnessed anything like this before, not even during his years as a bounty hunter, where death lurked behind every cactus bush. Thomas was in his early 40s with a weather-beaten face, rough stubble, and deep-set gray eyes. In recent years, he had given up bounty hunting, walking away from gunsmoke towns in search of peace. He bought this patch of dry, stubborn land, built a small cabin, and raised a few scrawny cattle, hoping for nothing more than a simple home. This past winter, as the cold wind whipped against the wooden walls and kept him awake night after night, Thomas made a decision to change his fate. He sent every dollar he had saved to a matchmaking agency in Kansas, requesting a bride through the mail. He waited for each stagecoach for every letter in reply. When he finally received word that the young woman would arrive at the beginning of spring, Thomas felt warmth in his heart for the first time in years. He repaired the wooden gate, cleaned the cattle pen, and even built a new dining table out of pine wood. Just the night before, he had sat alone in the cabin, hammering loose floorboards, imagining the sound of a woman's footsteps walking across them. But this morning, instead of a smile and a greeting, he was met with 3 hanged bodies at his gate, a bloody message planted at his doorstep, as if to say that his violent past had never truly gone to sleep. Thomas took a deep breath and carried the first woman into the cabin. She was light as air, her breath barely there. He laid her down beside the stove, then returned to bring in the other 2. Soon the small cabin was filled with the scent of blood, smoke, and cold, damp skin. As Thomas bent down one last time to fasten the door shut, his eyes narrowed. He had once given up guns, given up the hunt, but now he understood. Whoever had done this did not just want to kill these 3 women. They wanted to destroy the life he had fought so hard to rebuild. Thomas clenched his callous fists. If they came back, he would not be the man who just waited in silence anymore. The stove in the cabin burned brightly, its flames casting flickering shadows across the rough wooden walls. Thomas knelt beside the first woman, tearing an old shirt to wrap gently around her neck, covering the deep purple bruises left by the rope. He moved with careful precision, his large hands unexpectedly gentle, nothing like the rough man he usually appeared to be. The second woman coughed violently, her eyes wide open, breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Thomas quickly placed his hand on her back, helping her breathe more easily. When the coughing subsided, she slumped over, her sweat-soaked hair clinging to her face, but her breathing had steadied. Finally, the youngest, the one with the most youthful face, slowly opened her eyes. Her deep black eyes locked onto Thomas's, wild with panic like a cornered deer. Thomas raised both hands, his voice, but calm and steady. "No one will hurt you here. I will not let them come back for you." She trembled, then gave a faint nod. Her thin hand gripped his wrist tightly, as if clinging to the last shred of hope. Night slowly fell. Thomas added more wood to the fire, the warmth driving away the biting cold. He sat by the stove, tilting his head now and then to listen for the breathing of the 3 women. Close to midnight, the eldest stirred. She sat up with effort and asked in a hoarse voice, "Where are we?" "My ranch," Thomas replied, handing her a bowl of water. "My name is Thomas Yates." She drank in small sips, then looked at him with eyes full of both fear and gratitude. "We are Lydia, Mira, and June. They were going to sell us." Thomas froze, a fire rising in his chest. His voice grew tense. "Who?" Lydia shivered. "The men pretending to be marriage brokers. They tricked us onto their wagon, beat us along the way, then tried to hang us to send a warning to the others." Thomas went still. He had sent his money to marriage brokers all winter. Were they the same men? He looked at the three sisters, still trembling, bruises covering their arms, but their eyes glowed faintly with something new when they looked at him. It was not just about survival anymore. It was a choice. He stood, checked the rifle hanging on the wall, and loaded it with fresh rounds. This cabin was no longer just shelter. It would be a fortress. "Get some sleep," Thomas said, his voice low and firm like a command. "Tonight, I keep watch. Tomorrow morning, we get ready." At dawn the next morning, the first rays of sunlight slipped through the cracks in the door, casting light into a cabin still heavy with the scent of smoke. Thomas had stayed awake all night, sitting with his back against the wall, his rifle laid across his lap. He glanced over at the three women, each of them still breathing, their faces a little less pale, though still worn and hollow. Lydia was the first to wake. She tried to sit up, but her hands trembled violently. Thomas stepped over and helped her lean against the bedpost. "You need to eat," he said, then scooped out a bowl of thin corn porridge he had cooked earlier that morning. Lydia took the bowl, her eyes uncertain as she looked at him. Why did you save us?" Thomas was silent for a long while. He had never expected to answer that question. Finally, he spoke quietly. "Because I once lost someone I loved and I know what it feels like to be left to die." Lydia said nothing, then slowly raised the bowl to her lips. She ate slowly, each spoonful seeming to bring a little strength back. When she finished, Thomas turned to help Mira rewrap the bruises on her neck while June was given a warm drink of water. The way they looked at him had changed, not just with gratitude, but with trust. Throughout the morning, Thomas worked in silence. He walked out into the yard, checked the fencing, and rebuilt the gate that had been knocked loose. Though still weak, the three sisters came out to help. Mira, the second sister, tied new rope with shaking hands, her eyes darting at every distant hoofbeat. "Will they come back?" she whispered. "Yes," Thomas replied without looking up. "And this time, I'll be ready." Lydia stepped closer, her gaze steady. "If you need us, well, we are not going to let them string us up like livestock again." Thomas stared at her for a long moment, then gave a firm nod. "Then get ready. This is no longer just my fight." That afternoon, all four of them sat on the porch. Thomas cleaned the guns while the sisters carved bullets and cut strips of cloth. A strange new feeling settled over the place. The cabin, once a space of solitude, now echoed with breathing, soft conversation, and the crackle of fire. It felt almost like a family forged in hardship as the sun dipped low behind the valley. Thomas stood, eyes fixed on the distance where a red haze of dust hung in the air like a warning sign. "Tonight I'll stand watch," he said. "If they come, they will learn this is not a place to scare easy. Thank you for being here. And if this story reminded you of older days, dusty afternoons, and the sound of hooves echoing through your memory, consider subscribing to my channel. So each day we can sit together again, and I'll tell you another tale from the Wild West." Night fell fast as if the entire sky had pulled down a black curtain. Thomas sat on the cabin porch, his rifle resting across his knees, eyes locked on the darkening field. The night wind kicked up red dust in little spirals, carrying with it the cold stench of danger. From far off came the sound of hoofs, first slow and scattered, then pounding like war drums. Inside the cabin, the three sisters froze, listening, eyes wide with fear. Thomas raised his hand, signaling them to stay quiet. Out of the darkness, 7 horsemen emerged, circling the wooden gate. Their faces were dark, twisted with mocking grins, white teeth flashing in the moonlight. The leader, wearing a wide black hat, rode forward a few steps and called out in a high-pitched taunting voice, "Yates, you're holding something that ain't yours. Hand over those 3 women, and I might let you live." Thomas rose to his feet, his shadow stretching long across the dirt. He raised his rifle, voice low and growly. "They don't belong to you. They are free people. One more step and blood will spill." The men burst into cruel laughter. The sound sharp like metal scraping on stone. The leaders spat on the ground and sneered. "Then by sunrise, this whole ranch will burn. You'll all roast inside like rats." Gunfire cracked warning shots. Bullets slammed into the fence posts, sending splinters flying. The three sisters screamed and dropped to the floor. Thomas stood firm, finger curled on the trigger, but he did not shoot. Not yet. The raiders laughed again, then yanked their reins and turned, leaving behind a whirlwind of dust. As the sound of hooves faded, Thomas exhaled and stepped back into the cabin. His face was grim, eyes cold and sharp as steel. "They will be back." Lydia clutched her sisters tightly, her voice trembling with fear. "Can we run?" Thomas shook his head. "If we run, they will hunt us down. The only way is to turn this place into a trap." He set the rifle on the table, opened a crate of ammunition, and looked each of them in the eyes. "No one sleeps tonight. Tomorrow morning, we fight." The firelight cast flickering shadows across their faces, revealing the strain in each of them. "We have to get ready fast for the battle ahead," Thomas said. That night, Thomas's cabin became a makeshift fortress. He dragged furniture to barricade the doors, stuffed burlap sacks into the cracks to seal openings, and placed buckets of water beside the stove in case of fire. His rifle was clean to a shine, each magazine loaded to full. Every move he made was deliberate and silent like a ritual for war. Despite their injuries, the three sisters threw themselves into the work. Lydia, calm with the steadiness of an eldest sibling, tore cloth into long strips, ready to use for quick bandages. Mira hauled leftover planks from the old cattle pen, stacking them into a barrier near the gate. June, the youngest, trembled, but obeyed when Thomas told her to keep the oil lamp and fire starter ready. When everything was in place, the four of them sat by the fire. The flames cast a red glow over their tense faces. Thomas held a mug of cold coffee, eyes never leaving the gate outside. "You still have a chance to run," he said quietly. "If you leave now, you might get out of the valley before they return." Lydia looked at him for a long moment, then shook her head. "If we run, they'll catch us or they'll catch other women. We stay. If we die here." Thomas nodded, the gray in his eyes going still. He had once stood alone against the world. But this time he was not alone. Around midnight, the wind shifted and the prairie turned bitter cold. Thomas climbed onto the cabin roof, scanning the valley under the moonlight. On the distant horizon, he saw a faint trail of dust. They had started moving. He climbed down and said plainly, "They'll be here before sunrise. Everyone to your positions." Lydia gripped the revolver Thomas had given her. Mira held tight to her torch. June curled up in the corner of the cabin, her eyes fierce even as her lip bled from biting down too hard. Before the first light of dawn, Thomas stood on the porch, his shadow stretching long across the dew-soaked ground. He took a deep breath, heart pounding like a war drum. He was no longer just a lone rancher. He was a protector, and this morning, anyone who crossed that gate would pay the price. Before dawn could even break, the sound of hooves thundered like a storm. Thomas stood tall on the porch of the cabin, rifle resting in his arms. The three sisters crouched behind the barricades, eyes wide open. The air was thick, nothing could be heard, but the wind's howl and the pounding of hearts. Then they came. More than a dozen riders burst from the mist, forming a circle before the wooden gate. The leader rode a black horse, eyes blazing like a wild beast. He raised his hand and shouted, "Burn it all!" Torches flew toward the fence, flames roaring to life. But before they could cheer, Thomas's rifle cracked like lightning in a storm. The first man fell from his saddle, blood kicking up red dust. The rest howled and charged. Bullets tore through the wind, slamming into the cabin walls. Thomas fired shot after shot, each one finding its mark. With every reload, Lydia dashed out to deliver more ammo, fire blazing in her eyes. Mira lit more torches, hurling them at those trying to climb the fence. June, trembling but steady, struck down a man who made it into the yard with a wooden club. The battle turned the red dirty yard into a scene from hell. Horses screamed, smoke and fire choked the sky and gunfire merged with shouting. Thomas rolled behind the water trough, dropping 2 more attackers without flinching. Blood splattered his shirt, but he did not blink. At last, only the leader remained. He had been shot in the leg, but dragged himself toward the gate. Thomas stepped forward, rifle in hand, his shadow stretching across the scorched earth. "The game's over," Thomas growled, voice cold as steel. The man pulled a pistol, but Thomas was faster. The shot rang out sharp and final. The leader collapsed right at the gate, where just yesterday the 3 sisters had been strung up like cargo. The fire died slowly, leaving behind ash and the stench of smoke. The valley fell silent, again, broken only by the ragged breathing of the 4 who had survived. Thomas lowered his rifle and sank onto the porch step. Lydia knelt beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder, eyes full of gratitude. Mira and June held each other, tears streaming freely. They had won. The ranch still stood, and for the first time in years, Thomas felt like this was truly home. Not just his, but theirs. The sun finally rose slow, deliberate, as if it needed to witness every drop of blood that had been spilled through the night. Its first light swept across the valley, revealing the lingering smoke and the bullet-scarred walls of the cabin. The smell of gunpowder, burnt grass, and blood mixed into a bitter scent that Thomas knew he would never forget. He stood at the gate where just yesterday 3 robes had hung deciding fates. Today they lay scattered across the ground, burned, frayed, and severed. In their place stood 4 figures, him and the 3 sisters silent, watching the sunrise. Lydia stepped forward, her hand resting on the charred wooden post, as if trying to etch this moment into memory. She turned to Thomas, her eyes no longer filled with fear, but something firmer resolve. "We're alive because of you," she said. "No one gets to decide how we die anymore." Thomas nodded, his gray eyes calm and steady. "From this day on, this is your home. If you choose to stay, no one will take you away again. Not unless they go through me." Mira and June wrapped their arms around Lydia, tears falling freely, but their smiles lit up their faces. In that moment, the creaky old cabin was no longer just a shelter. It became a place of breath, warmth, and a shared promise. Thomas sat down on the steps, wiped down his rifle one last